part of my work, I'm also coordinating the previously mentioned project by Vespa, which is called BRIDGE. That's a short or an acronym for Building Relationships Through Innovative Development of Gender-Based Violence Awareness in Europe. So this is a regional project that we are leading here from Terre des Hommes in partnership with Defense for Children International in Belgium and Fedazil in Belgium, the NGO Arsis in Greece, the NGO Coping in Malta, and also with Terre des Hommes, Romania. This is a project that is supported by the European Union's Rights, Equality and Citizenship Program 2014-2020. And with this project, we are aiming to strengthen the statutory response to gender-based violence, which is affecting children and youth on the move in new countries. As part of this project, we are organizing a series of webinars on the topic of gender-based violence in migration, with the purpose to exchange and to share practices, experiences with others. Today's webinar, the purpose of today's webinar is to shed light on the experiences and issues of unaccompanied and separated girls in the migrant response, European response, and which is taking place in Europe, whereby UNICEF is mobilizing partners, national stakeholders, and other national authorities across European states in the areas of protection, education, health, and gender-based violence, amongst others. We exchanged with UNICEF earlier on the current work that they are doing. Specifically within the BRIDGE project, we are very much involved in developing training curricula for care professionals on gender-based violence, and this has been made available as part of this project and is currently available on the Child Hub platform in a number of languages. So I would encourage you all to check them out. But specifically with today's webinar, we wanted to exchange with UNICEF to bring forward their experiences. Specifically, the regional office for Eastern Europe and Central Asia of UNICEF, they've been focusing on these issues as part of a program called Action Against Gender-Based Violence Affecting Refugee and Migrant Women and Children in Greece, Italy, Serbia, and Bulgaria, an initiative that is funded by the United States.
Okay, thank you, Nanette, and thanks for all the Child Hub team for having us. I hope everyone can hear me and see me now, but if there's some technical issue, please let us know. So thank you all for taking the time to join us. I'm Sara. I'm working as protection officer at a local civil society organization called Infopark, and I will brief you a bit about the context that Infopark works in and what precisely is that we do in a couple of minutes when we reach this point. For now, let's dive into our topic today. So, as you all probably know, women and girls do account for almost half of all migrants globally. Approximately 48-point-something% of all displaced people are females. So existing literature and data demonstrate that women and girls, especially those traveling alone without a husband, father, brother, or other adult male companion, face particularly high risks of violence during the transit. So migration routes can be exceptionally dangerous for adolescent girls, especially those that are unaccompanied or separated, and they face a unique set of violence-related risks, including sexual violence and trafficking in human beings, which you will see from the examples soon enough. For now, let's just dive in, and I would kindly ask you to quickly answer a short question. It's a true or false question. Just give your first brief opinion. Don't think too much of it. It's anonymous. Let me give you a couple of seconds to do that. Okay, as I can see, there is a slight advantage on the false answer, but the opinion is quite divided. So we would say that the correct answer is false because the definition and the situation in the field is a bit complex. So not all girls are traveling without any adult caregiver. So to make sure that we are all on the same page when it comes to what is exactly is the population that we're talking about, let's share some distinctive definitions. So by unaccompanied child, we perceive to be a child that is separate from both parents and any other relatives or adults who are in charge of taking care of the child, either by law or the custom. Separated children, on the other hand, are separated from their parents, both of their parents, but they might be accompanied with another adult who is responsible for taking care of them, either related or assigned by custom or law. Okay, so this is how we envision this webinar structure to be. Let me just guide you briefly through what we are talking about. In the beginning, I will share with you how the issue came about and how we exactly perceived it in the field, and how we put it forward with consultations and what we learned from discussions from other colleagues and partners in the field and from the girls themselves. After that, Margarita will take you to the key challenges and the emerging good practices that we also learned by researching the issue a bit deeper. And in the end, we will try to see some key recommendations and tools and any tips and tricks for taking the issue forward to provide better programming for the girls. So as I mentioned, the Infopark is a local civil society organization partnering with UNICEF and other donors that works in capital of Serbia, Belgrade. And we work primarily with population of refugees and migrants who are on the move, meaning people who have just arrived to the country, who have been pushed back, or who are from any other reason sleeping rough. So this field experience that I'm sharing is coming from outside the reception centers, asylum centers, or any other forms of camps. And what we do is we are first responders, one of the first responders in the field. We provide protection services and outreach services to all-female mobile team. But we also provide some other services within our premises that include a safe space for women and children. And this is like in a nutshell what we do. But the challenges are many. One of them stemming from the point that the refugees and migrants 4 years on from the so-called crisis are still perceiving Serbia as a transit country. And especially working in the field as first responders, we actually have just very brief time and only one-time opportunity to interact with refugees and migrants. And that means that you're very restricted in the resources that you have to do all the necessary observation, identification, and interviewing actually the conversation. This means that we were in need of some very strict guidance and tools what to look for in this restricted time and place when working with vulnerable populations, especially girls who might be unaccompanied or separated. So through our experience, what came about is that we started noticing basically two groups of unaccompanied and separated girls in our experience. How it looks like is that we would receive a newly arrived family, say of Kurdish origin from Iraq, that would have parents, 3 boys and maybe 2 girls of 10 years old, one of whom would not interact with the parents or would not have the same story of the journey as the parents and so on. The second group were mostly girls from sub-Saharan Africa, especially from Somalia, who would arrive in groups without any or with very few male adult members, who would state that they are cousins or sisters, but then again would not know the names of each other when interviewed separately in the safe space, would not know any details of where are they going, how they met, and so on. So when starting to ask more questions, and with this we have the advantage of interviewing people separately in the safe space, of all female staff and of the cultural mediators, which I acknowledge are not always available, we started noticing that there are actually unaccompanied and separated girls, and that for far too long went under our radar because we were just noticing the unaccompanied and separated boys. As you can see, the unaccompanied girls, meaning without any responsible adult caregiver, were usually coming from Somalia or Eritrea, and would present themselves in different ways from the separated girls who would travel within a wider group or usually with some family that are related to, meaning that these can be their aunts and uncles or distant relatives, sometimes neighbors that they were assigned to by their parents, but they were still not their parents. Just a quick note, and my colleagues will share some special considerations, but we consider married girls who do not travel with their parents but just with their spouse to be unaccompanied too. So in our experience, we started noticing these girls mostly from Afghanistan with being separated, Somalia unaccompanied, and some girls of Iraqi Yazidi community, Kurdish and Yazidi community from Iraq. So with noticing these things in the field, we started looking into data and what is actually available about this on this issue. And you can see some of the numbers that there are already 30,000 children arriving in Europe from just during the last year, almost half of them being unaccompanied and separated, some of them being resettled and so on. Important to notice that almost all of them, like 70 or 80%, arrived in just firstly noticed in 3 countries, but we were not really finding anything specifically on girls. These are all very broad terms. There were not really any data specifically that captures the experiences, numbers, and needs, risks that unaccompanied and separated girls face compared to unaccompanied and separated boys. So, taking this forward, we started asking questions both to girls, to ourselves, and to further more experienced technical advisors so who these girls are, where are they coming from, and what is exactly their route, where are they going, and how they experience the transit. Is it the same, and in what point it differs from the experience of boys? As we know, they travel in groups of different members. They travel through different routes, perhaps. Why, most importantly, why us first responders in the field were not seeing these girls before, and why they are trying not to be seen, and in what ways are their needs different, and what are we not covering at the moment, where are the gaps. We started asking these questions, as I said, to the girls themselves, and what the main point that we need to look for as first responders is to just shift our focus, because we were for too long trained to perceive someone as unaccompanied and separated if they are presenting themselves in the way that traditionally boys are. We just did not notice that there are other ways of being unaccompanied and separated, which came to be associated with girls mostly. So this is briefly, in a nutshell, how it came about from the field, and then partnering with UNICEF, it was taken forward. Margherita and Francesca will share with you how.
Thank you, Sarah. Can everyone hear me? Margherita, are you here? Okay, we lost you for a minute. Small technical issue. Here I am.
So to continue on what Sarah has mentioned, all these questions start coming up from our UNICEF's partners in the European response. So Infopark was really where the issue was kind of first seen, and then this similar question were also coming up from partners in Greece and in Italy and in Bulgaria. And so we came together to start really thinking about what can we do to understand better the dynamic of girls, and of course to also be able then to respond better to their needs and risks. So during the past few months, we've been carrying out a research, not in formal terms, but based on literature review on data that was available, on tools, on studies that were focusing specifically on unaccompanied and separated girls. Then we conducted focus group discussions in Bulgaria, Greece and Serbia with relevant stakeholders, experts, service providers, to understand a little bit best what they were seeing, not seeing on the field. And then we also, very importantly, spoke with over 20 unaccompanied and separated girls, or formerly unaccompanied and separated, maybe now they're young adults, but that arrived unaccompanied and separated in Greece and Italy, to make sure that they guide our work and the things that we are putting together, essentially. So we'll do another little quiz, an opinion poll, which just looks at what do you think in terms of dynamics of age and nationality, whether you think that boys and girls have similar patterns. I'll give you a couple of minutes. You were quite fast in responding, and no one is saying true. Okay, so it seems that there is a certain agreement that there is a difference in terms of age and nationality around boys and girls that are arriving in Europe unaccompanied and separated. And that is absolutely correct. You can see just as a image here the difference. So in general, girls tend to be a little younger than boys arriving in Europe unaccompanied, unseparated. Let's consider that in the European response, children that are arriving are mostly older adolescents that are arriving unaccompanied and separated. And in the case of girls, there is a little bit more of a percentage that is 14 and under compared to boys, and the nationalities are quite different. So for example, in Italy, the top 2-3 nationalities of girls are completely different than the ones of boys, but this is something that is consistent throughout. And one of the big issues that we have identified is that very rarely you can find analysis of that is separate from the ones of boys. And so, for example, you wouldn't know that girls were younger because their percentages are indeed smaller than the ones of boys, and you would also not know that they come from different countries which carry with that different story, different risks, different issues. And just to point out one thing about this slide that I'm showing you, which comes from a European institution, but you know, it's a very interesting and useful one. But as you might see, it says share of women in total on unaccompanied minors applicants. So they use the word women, which is an interesting point to point out, because the other thing that is coming up very clearly is that as service providers, we still have a lot to learn. And in terms of the data, this is what we have in general in the countries that we've been focusing on, which is in Bulgaria, Greece, Italy, and Serbia. In Bulgaria, around 3% of unaccompanied and separated children are girls. In Greece is about 6.2%. In Italy is about 7.2%. And in Serbia in 2001, only one girl
was accommodated in a dedicated accommodation. There is not another full statistic on this that we can use. So as you can see, in terms of what the data tells us, in terms of percentage, it shows that the percentage of unaccompanied and separated girls is far smaller compared to the ones of boys. And of course, we don't dispute this fact. There are fewer girls than boys, but the data only shows girls that have been identified and registered somewhere as unaccompanied and separated. And so it only gives a partial overview of what is actually going on. And so to continue answer our questions, we started looking at how do girls travel according to our knowledge of experts, and particularly the girls' experience. And one thing that came out very, very strongly as a finding is that particularly along the Balkan route, girls very, very often join families as they are traveling. And not their families, not neighbors, not friends. They literally get connected with the family en route. And on the other hand, in the girls that are arriving from the central Mediterranean route are often, unfortunately, more often than not, trafficked. And the reasons why girls connect to family was very clearly said many, many times by the girls that we spoke with, is that it's a protective measure because otherwise the bad guys would catch them. This was in their words. And there is a quote here, boys help the families, but girls need families. So they really felt in the perceptions of girls that without a family there would be a great risk. And of course, this mechanism is both protective, but it carries specific risks as well. And another way of traveling is at times with an adult male companion, sometimes a husband, sometimes somebody that they meet en route as well. So these are just some of the key strategies that girls use to move. And then there is a huge issue that is coming up around identification of unaccompanied and separated girls. On the one hand, there are strategies that girls seem to be adopting not to be identified, so they are themselves somehow unwilling to be identified as such. This is sometimes because they are instructed to do so by traffickers or smugglers. They are traveling to join the husbands, and so again they prefer to kind of go under the radar if they need to do that. They lack the information on what the situation actually is, so sometimes they're just concerned of what might happen to them. And there is a huge issue of trust as they arrive in Europe, so they mostly relate to their own communities, but have more difficulties in trusting service providers themselves. And at border point, from a service provision perspective, usually the first encounter is with law enforcement. That usually doesn't prioritize screening for children that are not visibly unaccompanied. So if there is a group that is only children, they would be, of course, looked at, but children that appear to be within a family are usually not immediately looked at, and often this is how girls will then enter. Age in general is considered only to a certain extent a key risk indicator, and there is little experience in determining family links, particularly at the beginning of a process and upon arrival. In terms of once girls are already arrived, this is when we start asking, okay, but then once you are in a refugee camp, somewhere in Greece or in South Italy or elsewhere, why is it that girls are still not coming forward, and why are we not seeing them? And so one of the key elements is that there is a lack of service in place. Unfortunately, few safe spaces available, few places where girls can get to know service providers and build trust. There is a reluctance from authorities themselves, it seems, to identify somebody as younger rather than older. And limited trust, of course, in terms of the different experiences that girls had with adults during their travel, and limited capacity of service providers to provide full services, including in relation to GBV. And again, the lack of information that is provided and it's available. So girls told us that sometimes once they arrived, they still stayed on with the families that they traveled with for a long time, even though they knew that they were in Europe, they knew that they wouldn't be able to move on in their travel, but they still stayed with the hosting family. And often they said it's because they were scared. They didn't know what would happen to them as young girls if they came forward. They also reported that no one really came and asked questions to them or to the family. Once they reported that they were somebody's sisters or somebody's daughter, that was just how it was accepted. And they finally came forward either because the situation became too much. In the cases of girls in Italy that were traveling, because of trafficking, it's a very complex issues. Girls that arrive with their husbands at times come forward only if there are real, very deep issue in the relationship. But otherwise, again, there is a limited kind of looking at them and girls coming forward. And in fact, one thing that we need to highlight and that we cannot not mention is around the issue of child marriage. There is very limited information in terms of how many married girls came in during the last few years, or how many boys that were married also came in. In Europe, the legislation around early marriage, child marriage varies. And one thing that is clear is that at the moment of arrival, of accommodation, of best interest determination, identification of guardians, the practices around Europe vary incredibly, and we found some practices that were positive and practices that were more dangerous, such as in some sporadic cases, having the husband become the legal guardian of the underage wife, which is, of course, not something that legally is very well explained. It's kind of like a gray area, but something that we identified as an issue. And the kind of good practices in terms of what is working to have girls come forward or identifying them are actually somehow traditionally related to a positive and complete GBV response approach, an empowerment approach. So the places where then girls tend to come forward are the women and girls safe spaces where they are available. They are trusted service providers once that there is a time for building trust. And also the provision of information when done purposely with the specific audience in mind also really help, but this is quite a rare occurrence. And so in our preliminary finding, looking at all of these, what we concluded is that in general, girls might be less than unaccompanied girls, might be less than boys, but they're definitely also more invisible than unaccompanied and separated boys. They use different strategies when they move around and as they travel. They use different coping mechanisms that often associate them with a family group. There are still a lot of limitations in terms of data, what we know, and the way that tools are specifically adapted to the patterns of and needs of girls. And there is generally a lack of strong awareness around this issue among practitioners, not so much because there is no interest or there is absolutely no knowledge, but it seems that because the European response has been fairly dominated by the great quantity of boys arriving, this issue was then kind of kept a little bit under the rug and not looked at very clearly by many. And so this is why we are continuing to undertake this work. So these are our preliminary conclusions from the consultations and the research that we've done. And now I'm going to give the word to Francesca, which will continue with the tools.
Thanks, colleagues, and I'm really glad that I will take you to the most exciting part of our work, and then it's our recommendations, and I would like to present you some of the tools that we jointly elaborated with partners and girls. Indeed, as Sarah mentioned, Infopark turned for support and advice to UNICEF here in Serbia to understand more about the problems, and I felt really frustrated that not as a GBV, nor as a child protection specialist, I really came across consistently to these issues, or nor I could refer to a body of literature or guidance that can support our work. So I'm happy that we are now maybe putting forward for the use of the broader community some of our experience and knowledge, and hopefully this can be of use for many of you. Based a bit on the remarks and conclusions that Margherita was just describing you, we came up with two core streams of recommendations. The first one is related to the importance of equipping frontline workers, partners, service providers with tools and skills to identify. As one of the main areas was really the identification of girls are unaccompanied and separated. So we really believe that it will be important to have targeted advocacy towards state authorities, border police, but also maybe doctors, whoever comes into contact with the migrants or population on the move. We also stress the importance to have really strong, robust, disaggregated data and information management system that can allow us as practitioners to detect trends or alarming trends, like, you know, girls may be going invisible in some countries and coming up in a high number in other countries. We believe that maybe having a dedicated training or capacity building program to frontline workers, including this topic, will be definitely of high importance to support them in their identification and help them in understanding this issue. The second area of recommendation is related maybe to the response part. Once girls identify themselves or have been identified as separated and unaccompanied, indeed we still found that there is a limited practice and experience in providing really timely care, and then girls themselves were also not really happy or keen to join those programming at the beginning. As Margherita was saying, girls would prefer still to stay together with an unknown family rather than being welcomed to the dedicated services that are somehow available throughout the European response. So it is really for us important to work on having dedicated safe spaces for women and girls, on supporting state authorities to develop a best interest assessment and best interest determination procedures that can look at the specific vulnerabilities of this group of girls, that can really address in a child-centered way the rights of girls in a marriage, or the rights of girls that are maybe mothers themselves already. So it will be also important for us to place at the center of our advocacy and intervention the importance of always providing a space for girls to voice their needs and concerns. So not always addressing our programming maybe to the adults or to the families, implying that girls are safe and generally part of that family, but actually to really develop targeted activities with them. So these were the two sets of recommendations that we would like to put forward today and then to discuss with you. And then we were trying to operationalize them more also with the development of tools. So in case in your practice you will have a colleague, a curious colleague like Sarah asking for tools and recommendation, hopefully in the future we will be more prepared and having agreed upon and tested tools. But before diving into it, I would like you to answer a quiz, especially asking you if in your practice, in your work, you have been using or are you familiar with any tools supporting identification of unaccompanied girls. Please, the vote is open. Thanks. So I think the results of the poll clearly show that there is really limited material out there that can guide our work and then can provide really as a roadmap, a path for supporting our day-to-day practice. As my colleagues were saying, we have really extensively looked at the literature of toolkits, material identification tools from a variety of organizations beyond, of course, UNICEF, and very few were the tools that could really be helpful. Some were maybe could be of help. Some other mentioned girls, but we had really few tips and tricks on how actually to improve our day-to-day work. So we would like today to present some of our conclusive tools that we developed. It's important to say that I mean the tools, the first draft of the tools were of course elaborated a bit at the desk within UNICEF offices with the support of some partners, but then we also take them, we share them with all our partners in the 4 countries: Bulgaria, Serbia, Greece, and Italy, and then we were really consulting them to understand if these specific tools will be of use and how to improve them. We have also shared and piloted them with some of our frontline workers. We have also shared them with border police representatives, with social workers in charge of interviews. We have shared them above all with girls, and we were asking them if some of the contents or some of the questions that we included would actually resonate to them, would actually be representing of all their needs and voices. So I think it was these two tools really represent a coordinated and joint effort to fill a gap that we have noticed into the practice. So the first tool that we will spend maybe more time today, it's a very easy tip sheet that is meant to provide any frontline workers from the border, at a hospital, in a center, in an asylum center, or in any recreational maybe spot where families, children, and people on the move can gather, can provide maybe 9 important red flag signs that might be a sign that a girl is unaccompanied and separated. And the second tool is a tool that it's meant to go a bit more in depth, and hence to be used by specialized actors, either social workers, psychologists, or protection officers, either with a child protection or gender-based violence background, depending on the context. So it's meant a bit to have more, to be used by a qualified, so to say, practitioner. So as I was saying, let's focus more on the first tool that is meant for a broader use. And the idea, we have also this crazy ambitious visual to translate that into a poster that can be displayed in all the airports or border police or migration points, and then they should really alert whoever comes into contact with people on the move about the specific risks and how to identify unaccompanied and separated girls. We have then mapped out some of the things that girls themselves were telling us, or practitioners working with them were telling us as indicators that they might be unaccompanied and separated. The first is clearly straightforward. So the girl is traveling alone, seems not to be accompanied by any adult. And then that is definitely a big red flag that the person needs to be assisted. The girl has also not proper valid travel documents, or those are maybe kept or taken by somebody else, or she cannot really justify where these documents come from, and maybe they're also falsified documents. The third is that we can see that the girl is traveling indeed with another family, one of those families that my previous colleagues was telling you girls decided to travel with for safety or for a variety of other reasons, but you could still spot that the relationship is not a caring, nurturing, or a genuine safe relationship. There will not be the standard relations between a parent or a child because of the age ratio or because of behavioral patterns that you might, a frontline worker might observe. The fourth tip is also quite interesting. It was shared by us by cultural mediators that you might know really play a pivotal role in the emergency in Europe. And they were saying, you know, usually these girls, they do speak a similar language of the family traveling with, but they either have another dialect or they seem not so fluent. So that is definitely one of other pattern indicator that might be considered a red flag for us. And then, of course, the girl might look a bit different in her appearance or physical characteristic to the group. Maybe also related to the way of dressing, to the care placed in her appearance, and of course maybe on the physical features of her body or face. The other four are the following, that also, as usual, we identified as pregnancy, or one of the key indicators that the girl might also be at risk, not possibly that being unaccompanied or separated, but is definitely a red flag that requires action for any frontline workers. Or maybe the girl seems to be watching after some other children in the family, or having, assuming a kind of parental care role with others, children traveling together. It also seems that the seventh indicator is related to the psychosocial well-being of the girl, that seems scared, intimidated, not really at ease with the group traveling with, and then showing signs of distress. Number 8 is similar to what I was saying before, kind of limited care in her appearance, that also is often translates into limited personal hygiene or care, maybe because the family she travels with does not provide enough hygiene items for her to take care of herself. And then number 9 is also something that we heard a lot by all our partners, and that is very similar to the girls that are victims of trafficking, as there is really a strong relationship between these two categories, is the fact that those girls were telling all a very, very similar stories that look like rehearsed. Like if somebody told them to tell that story, but if you were actually asking for more information or digging further, she will not be able to provide a comprehensive explanation, or where she comes from, which country she has traveled through, or where she's going. So this is one of the first tools that we elaborated, and then as we said, it's really related to quick, so to say, not specialized identification of girls that are maybe unaccompanied and separated. That doesn't mean, of course, that we need to have all these 9 signs together, nor than one sign. If we recognize one sign, that means that the girl is actually unaccompanied or separated, but there are definitely red flags that as protection specialists we need to consider, and then we need to advocate for frontline workers to refer these girls for specialized care, social workforce, etc. I just go very briefly through the second tool that, as I was saying before, is a tool that is meant to be used by specialized people, specialized practitioners, psychologists, or people who have been passing a training on interviewing children and working on gender-based violence issues. And here we are going a bit more in depth on which are those indicators, again, observational indicators that might be signs, again, that the girl is unaccompanied or separated. We have some general indicators, again, that are very similar to the one before. Maybe I would like just to invite you to go through them and then to read them more in depth when we will share the final presentation. So again, this is very important. Maybe girls travel with an older man that is an uncle. If you work in an emergency crisis in Europe, you might have heard the word uncle coming up even several times during a day. Girls might be also reluctant to say where they will be accommodated or where they're going next, and they don't speak, again, the languages. So these are very general indicators that might be a sign for girls to be unaccompanied and separated. Then this checklist provides also some indicators on the physical appearance of girls. Again, the girl might be not really taken care as such as the other member of the family. She might also have bruise or physical injuries, either self-inflicted or or harm caused by others. She also might be, her appearance, general hygiene might also look neglected. And we also seen that abuse of a substance can also be a sign of it. And then definitely there are some behavioral signs that the girl might be at risk and eventually also unaccompanied and separated. And these are the common signs that you might find in a girl, in a child in distress. So she might have a volatile behavior, not talking, a sleeping disorder. She might be restless, and she might have some signs of behavior that are not really matching her declared age. And for whoever then, the second part of these tools is also then a questionnaire. So if we identified some of the signs and indicators present in the checklist, we might also be willing then to have a more in-depth conversation. And this what important maybe to underline is that we need really to stress to the families or to all frontline workers that these interviews needs to happen in a confidential and safe space, but separately from the adults. There is, unfortunately, this practice that maybe, as Sarah was saying, because we are working very fast, because we work in a very remote and not remote and dilapidated areas and neighborhoods, we often sometimes will not create a confidential and safe space to allow us to a conducive interview with girls. But we think it's really important to make sure that the girls, a suspected girls that is traveling unaccompanied and separated, and the adults accompany her should be interviewed separately for us then to compare the answer and for us somehow to identify if the relationship is safe, genuine, and based on a family link. So that, I know it was a very quick overview of some of the tools or guidance that we came up, but maybe it will be, you will be interested in knowing more what is next, and then eventually also to see how to be engaged and how to be consulted further. We have developing kind of this a package of support for frontline workers that is also it also includes a guidance note or note with some advocacy points and then kind of highlighting again all the different important dimension of working with working and identifying unaccompanied and separated girls. We are also very keen as UNICEF, but all our partners, to really advocate in different forums to consider this as one of the issues that needs still to prioritize, and that we keep saying that this has been put aside for too long, and especially in Europe after almost 5 years, getting to the 5th year of the emergency response, we need and we should have the time and the knowledge to look at the nuance of what child protection and gender-based violence means. We will be happy to test and pilot more the tools that we develop, especially the first one. As I was saying, we will have to have really a visual around it, maybe a poster displaying it widely in the different entry points of migration for migrants and refugees. And then in regard to the second tool, we would like to have it included maybe also within our other European institutions forum or other important training package that are targeting social worker or practitioner in the field. So I know it has been a very dense webinar with a lot of information, and then we have also tried to present some of the solution or recommendation that we came about. And I think we can end here the presentation, and we will be happy, myself, Margherita and Sara, to answer any of your questions and to continue the conversation with you all. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much for a very useful and very concrete presentation. I believe that everybody really enjoyed it. I would say on my behalf that these tools that you presented are very, very interesting, very concrete and useful. I would like to stress out that all of these PowerPoint presentation and recordings will be included in the webinar page on the Child Hub, so it will be really possible for all the participants to see it again. Now I invite all of 3 presenters to open the cameras and give floor, of course, to the participants to ask any questions if they have, of course. We are having 2 or 3 minutes, so please you can use this time to ask if you have any kind of questions. I see that some of the people are okay. I just wanted to, of course, stress out that you have on the last slide of the PowerPoint presentation your email. So if you don't have time now to type everything you feel or every questions you have, I believe that it is okay for the presenters to use these emails to ask the question also directly to them after the webinar. Also, there is a question from Liliana. Thank you very much for those very interesting presentation. Could you please tell us more about the relationship between the girls and these families?
I will take this question, and then maybe I'll also ask Sara to complete. From the information that we have gathered through the consultations with the girls, for the girls that choose to use this coping mechanism of choosing a family to travel with, the ones that we spoke with in general were quite positive about their relationship with the family. They said that they were welcoming and that they took care of them. We never asked directly questions about violence and exploitation because that was not the purpose of the consultation. But of course it came out that they do participate a lot in the caring of the family, and that for the girls themselves that was perceived as a choice, giving back to the family that was helping them. But of course at the same time, in a few cases we also know that the and the relationship with the family ended in difficult ways, perhaps with the female members of the families leaving, the girl remaining alone with the male member of the family that was having some complex behaviors. So, you know, like what we said before, it seems that in general this is used as a protective mechanism, but of course, as anything, it carries a protective side, but also a risk side to things, and it's still the responsibility of service providers to support girls that are away from their families. So, of course, in our advocacy and our key messages is not to say that if girls are living with another family, they should be taken away from their family, but it's more about providing additional support and to make sure that assessing the relationship, as Francesca was saying, to ensure that it's a positive and safe one. So, Sara, do you want to add anything in your experience?
I would just briefly agree with what you said. It really comes down to the question whether the family is playing a protective role, or is there some exploitative element that can slip into trafficking or related abuses. And it's just the idea is to do the advocacy and to inform all these responders in the field about their role, like who should assign whether the relationship is abusive or not. The first responders just to check if the family is really the primary family or not. And I would agree that most girls usually would say that the family was a protective way to actually be on the road. But as Francesca pointed out, some of the indicators can show that the relationship is not good, meaning that they are not given enough food or hygiene items, that they are made to take care of the younger members of the family and so on. So this is one of the points to really look for.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. We have also one question from the Florence, and it will be the last question as we stepped out of 1 hour of the webinar. We are having the question like, right now unaccompanied girls are still often not identified. Is anything known about what the outcomes are for them, generally speaking?
Francesca, maybe you can help me to answer also this for Serbia. In general, what we know is that services for unaccompanied and separated children are in general available. In general, they are more protective. They guarantee a better access to services, to education, to a number of opportunities as well. Obviously, there are many challenges, even if someone is identified as unaccompanied or separated. There are long waiting times sometimes to access shelters that are dedicated to unaccompanied and separated girls. This is particularly the case in Greece and Italy, where there is a high number. There are challenges around being given a guardian. So there are issues, but at the same time, in general, and particularly from what we hear from the stories of the girls, once they entered the more supported and protective path that comes with being recognized as being unaccompanied, the outcomes were actually quite positive. And the ones that I recently spoke with in Greece were all so kind of fulfilled in that moment. They were all going to school. They all lived in a semi-independent flat. They had a rich social life. So it was very different than living in the refugee camp with a family that was not their own. So obviously there are opportunities, if you know, with of course, with always the caveat that everything in the refugee and migrant response is complex and not perfect.
Maybe I just complement on the other side, exactly, because I've been working mainly on in a country where the numbers are relatively small, especially, as we have seen before, those related to unaccompanied and separated girls, for all the reasons that we have seen. So unfortunately, that's true that even if they are identified, they are so there are still relatively few facilities that can really meet the comprehensive needs of the unaccompanied and separated girls, especially if we consider that maybe they might be mothers themselves or they might be married also. So that's the importance of always keeping services and advocacy at the same time, because the outcomes is always to find a better place for them because of their specific needs, but this is not always systemically addressed, especially in countries where this has been a neglected or a neglected issue for the past year.
Okay, thank you. And we still have one question, if it's okay for you not to leave it in the air, from Fulvia. She asked, before using these tools, which sounded very interesting, is there a process of assessing the capacity to respond and support a specific group of girls? I'm just thinking of the risk associated with identification of vulnerable groups in absence of specialized services.
Ciao Fulvia.
Okay.
She's my former colleague. Well, we indeed we thought about this a lot. One thing that we want to highlight very strongly is that these are tools meant only for the identification of unaccompanied and separated girls, not GBV related issues that otherwise we would use other methodologies. So I think Francesca explained that the first tool is really like a tip sheet. It's like a reminder. It's like something that you keep there so that your eyes are focused on the fact that while you might see boys alone, you might see girls in a different context and they still might be unaccompanied. While for the other tool that is much more complex, our intention is in fact to have a much longer process for its development, its testing, training, perhaps working with other institutions that already have identification tools for vulnerable groups, like for example IASO and so on. Francesca, do you want to add something?
Yeah, Mike.
I think your mic.
Yes, not just to reiterate that that was really core to our discussions of our partners and psychologists and social workers that are part of were part of our consultations group, was exactly, but you know, we don't want to force frontline workers to become psychologists. We don't want to impose roles and responsibilities that are not theirs. So we are fully aware about the different audience and the different requirements that entail. And then at the bottom of every tool, there will be always our standard GBB language about the importance of referral and to have mapped out services available in case further care will be needed for child protection or GBV related issues.
Okay, so thank you very much. I would like to say that it was a really pleasure to have you on behalf of the Child Hub team. I'm looking forward, of course, if there will be any kind of possibility in the future cooperate on this in this area and subjects, of course. And I think that the number of participants who came to the webinar showing that it's really important subject. I'm now sharing evaluation polls. I would like to ask for all of you to share your opinion, to give us the feedback. It is really important for us to have it so we can upgrade, of course, our services for you. And also, if you would like to have a certificate of attendance of this webinar, you can write to this email. And you will get it on your email in a matter of a few days. So thank you very much to everybody. I'm wishing you a very lovely rest of the day. Goodbye.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.